A friend of mine showed me how to use Google Maps. I'm sure you've seen it. It lets you use satellite images to look at locations all over the world. A few years ago, I was in a car accident. Since then, I don't really leave the house that often. It's difficult, and the idea of seeing a car drive by me makes me feel lightheaded. I was fascinated by the fact that I could see all over the world, almost like being there. I could virtually walk down the streets, and it almost felt like I was really there. I became instantly hooked. It gave me a real eye on the world. I could go to almost any major city, and I did. I'd seen the streets in China, Japan, Germany, and England, so many places. I'd even gone to tourist attractions like the Great Barrier Reef and Dracula's Castle. My favorite was to go to random places in major cities and see how many people and animals I could find. The faces of the people were always blurred out to protect their privacy, but it was still enjoyable to see them out there, enjoying their life, walking like it was no big deal. She must have good taste, I laughed. I zoomed in closer and noticed a gray bag she carried on a gray and purple shoulder strap. She was walking in a relaxed manner, one hand trailing in the wall beside her. I bet if I could have seen her face, I would have seen that she was smiling. I began to feel a little sad. I let my hands fall onto the arms of my wheelchair and looked at her for a minute more. I wished that I could be there, walking so carefree with her. That wouldn't happen though, until I died. I was stuck in this chair. I sighed and zoomed out of Tokyo. Enough of this for tonight. I turned off the computer and went to bed. I got up early and decided to look around Paris. Paris was always fun. I liked to look at a city with all the old, beautiful buildings and so many people to watch. I randomly zoomed onto an area and saw a street lined with old brick buildings, a few small shops and an old tan brick church. Ahead was an intersection and dozens of people walked by. A balding businessman walked quickly past, looking back at an old woman, hair covered with a scarf, carrying a large purse. A curvy woman in black pants that were too tight stared into a store window, and two women led a group of small children around a corner. I spun the view around a few more times and then saw something peculiar. Sitting on the bench at the bus stop were two people. One of them was a young woman with her feet stuck in front of her in a relaxed manner. She was wearing a pair of red sneakers like my own. I was startled for a moment as I noticed the black pants, white t-shirt, and black hooded jacket. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely behind her head. A gray bag sat on the bench beside her, the shoulder strap hooked over her shoulder. This is crazy, I thought. It can't possibly be the same woman. This is a different country, different continent even. How could it be her? This was stupid. It wasn't as if these were live photographs. They were taken ahead of time and then stored. It's not like she was in two places at once. She could just be a traveler. Besides, without seeing her face, it was impossible to tell if it was the same person. Brown hair was probably the most common hair color in the world. Those red sneakers were something I purchased online. I'm sure a million other people did too. I shook my head and went to fix some lunch. When I got back online, I decided to look at Berlin. I picked a random street as usual. It looked pretty empty. There were brick buildings lining the streets looking more like factories than anything else. There were also empty lots full of grass and piled gravel. There wasn't much to see at all, really. There was a line of motorbikes and a car with two German flags sticking up from it. After more searching, I found one kid. He looked like he was dressed for school, a jacket thrown over his back. He was intently looking at some kind of mobile device. I was disappointed. I started to leave, but then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I turned the view, and there they were, Those damned red sneakers. She was standing on a street corner next to some sort of signpost. She had a hand on the post looking down the street as if waiting to cross it. I stared in shock. How could she be there too? Even if she was traveling, there's no way I could find her every time. Even finding her in Paris would have been one heck of a coincidence. But this was crazy. Was this some kind of joke? Had Google decided to play a prank on its users that used their product so much? It would have been a great joke. I did a quick search, looking for a note about a woman that shows up like Waldo. There was nothing. I looked through articles on strange things you can see on Google Maps, but none of them mentioned the woman that travels the world with you. This was crazy. Had my self-imposed isolation driven me mad? Had I become so lonely that I created a hallucination for myself? Leaving the Berlin image on my screen, I sent a text message to a friend asking him to look at the locations. I asked him if he saw the same woman, then I waited. Hands sweating, heart thumping in my chest. I jumped when my phone beeped with a return text message 10 minutes later. The text read, "I see the lady you're talking about in Berlin. I didn't see her in Paris or Tokyo. Is this some kind of game or what? Are you okay?" I didn't respond, instead returning to the locations in Tokyo and Paris. There she was. She was there, but it was different. She no longer sat on the bus stop bench in Paris. She was standing in front of it looking for something in her bag. In Tokyo, she was blocks away, squatting down to pet that calico cat. I shivered. Who was she? What was happening? I switched the map to Brussels. It was another city street. It was lined with old-looking buildings with shops on ground level, and what I guessed was apartments above. I quickly scanned the streets. They were empty, other than a stocky woman in a bright blue sweater. I did a second sweep. She wasn't there. I sighed in relief. I couldn't believe I was getting so worked up about this. It was nothing but a coincidence. I stopped, my eyes frozen on the screen. There was a building at the point of a fork in the road, white with a black ironwork framed balcony jutting from the second floor. I hadn't seen her as I'd been looking at the sidewalks. There she stood, standing on the balcony, her head tilted in the direction of the camera, almost like she was coyly looking at me. My breath caught in my throat. I switched to Sydney. She was leaning against the wall, inside the doorway of a bright blue Carrick's pharmacy building. London showed her getting ready to step onto a red double-decker bus, her head turned to look over her shoulder. She was everywhere I looked. She stood on a brick sidewalk on a bridge in Venice. She walked across a yellow-barred crosswalk in Zurich, and in Hong Kong she stood between a Wing Lung Bank and a McDonald's, adjusting the strap on her bag. In each picture, she came closer and closer to looking directly at me with her blurred-out face. My heart felt like a terrified bird, slamming around inside my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the police. Should I send screenshots to Google? I clenched my fists tightly and closed my eyes. Who was she? Was she following me? Was I following her? I wished I could see the expression on her face, know what she saw when she looked back at me. I wanted to get out of the chair and run. Why is it that the only thing that made me feel free again was the thing that made me feel even more trapped? I had to know. I typed in the name of my town and zoomed into a random street. It was a couple of miles from my house. The gates to the city park were shown in the clarity of daylight, despite it being night here. There she was. There she was. She was only a few miles from my house, standing under the ironwork arch that stated the name of the park. She looked directly at the camera, directly at me. I felt like I might throw up. She was near me and she was watching me. She was coming for me. What did she want? I typed in the name of the apartment complex where I'd live. I could see the outside of the building. The parking lot was full of cars, and there were a few blurred out children on the playground. I searched everywhere for her. She wasn't in the parking lot or on the sidewalks, nor hiding between the buildings or standing in the playground. I even scanned each of the cars, behind the bushes, and each of the blurred out windows. She wasn't there. I curled tightly around myself and laid my head down on the desk. This place was safe. I didn't leave the apartment anyway. I would never use Google Maps again. I would never see her again. She could stay at the park for all I cared. I smiled to myself and was surprised to find a tear slipping down my face. "I'm safe," I said to myself in a whisper. It felt good to hear it out loud. "I'm safe." As I said it, there was a knock at the door. A chill ran down my spine. I had a camera hooked to my computer that showed who was at the front door, which made it easier for me with my mobility issues. I slowly reached for the control to show myself who was outside, but my hand trembled furiously. As I touched the control, I realized my mistake. The last of Google's images that I'd seen had only shown the outside of the building. Just the outside. I looked at the screen and saw a woman in a white t-shirt, black pants, black hooded jacket, and carrying a gray bag with a purple and gray striped shoulder strap. Of course, there were those red sneakers. She looked directly at the camera, her face still a complete blur. As I tried to stifle a scream, she raised a hand and knocked loudly on my front door.
I used to go diving a lot. Not so much anymore, but a couple of years ago I was really into it. Had my license and everything. It's really beautiful down there. The pale patterned sand, the water washing away the distance like a blue mist, and flashes of the brightest colors you've ever seen as some fish dart into view. I've done my share of exploring wrecks and grottos, but my favorite thing to do is hover right where the shelf plunges into the deep. You get the greatest dynamics there as deep sea creatures come up to feed. Anyway, one time I was drifting near Antigua, about 40 feet down. I had 2 tanks with me so I could stay down for several hours. The shelf sloped off to my left, and rocks and coral broke the monotony of the sand to my right. I hadn't seen much that day and I was getting a bit bored, but then I noticed a large octopus. It was a deep sea type, probably washed up accidentally since they don't usually come off the hunt. It seemed sluggish and didn't react much when I drifted over to it. Now, octopi are not friendly creatures. If you manage to get near one, they usually flee within seconds. I'm sure you've seen videos of them changing colors to match their environment. Not all species can do that, but they're all very good at hiding, so seeing a deep-sea octopus up close was quite an opportunity. It was about a foot from crown to beak, and dark mottled green. Its tentacles curled around it, perhaps 4 feet long when extended, and pale on the underside. Its eyes looked like golden rings around narrow black pupils. It was having trouble moving and looked half dead. I decided to try to get near it. There were some yellowtail jacks nearby, and I spared one with my knife. Sorry if that offends you, I'm not one of those touch-nothing divers. Cautiously, I approached the octopus and offered it my fish, shoving it out ahead of me and letting it drift towards the creature. A success, it didn't run, but lazily reached an arm out to capture the morsel. It brought it under its beak and began to devour it. I drifted closer, trying to acclimate it to my presence. Over maybe half an hour or so, it became more lively and used to my presence. Apparently, I had bought its tolerance with my offering, and it even began to play a bit, darting away from me and then back. I had a stick with me that I used to test holes in mud and such, and it occurred to me that maybe I could teach it to play fetch. I brought the stick out and waved it until it seemed like I had its attention, and then threw the stick out sideways. It didn't go very far underwater, of course, but the octopus went after it and grabbed hold with its tentacles. It didn't seem inclined to return to me though, so I swam closer. It was waving the stick at me, then tossed it out to the side. It was copying me. I retrieved the stick, and then an interesting idea came into my head. Next to us was a large flat rock covered in half an inch of mud and detritus. Careful not to disturb the layers, I took the stick and slowly drew a crude figure of a man. 2 legs, 2 arms, and a round head coming off a central cylinder. The octopus seemed to be watching with interest. I tossed it the stick and it caught it easily. It sat there, toying with it, and for a few moments I thought my expectations had been too high, but then it reached out with the stick and began tracing its own mark in the mud. It was even cruder than mine to be sure, but clearly drawing. However, the proportions were all wrong. It had fused the head and the body into one ball, and there were too many legs. I was just happy it was copying me. I'd heard octopi were smart, but this was really something. But then, it hit me like a freezing wave. The octopus wasn't copying my drawing. It was drawing itself. The implications for this were huge. If I'd had a video camera back then, I would be a famous man today. The only other animal I'm aware of that's capable of the imagination and self-awareness to do something like that is the ape, first cousin to humans. That the ancient octopus, without so much as a spinal column, had the mental capacity for such a feat would surely have turned biology on its head. However, I didn't have a camera, and the scientists I've told my story to greet it with understandable skepticism. I would put all my time into trying to prove it myself, but I just can't bring myself to go diving anymore. Anyway, once that realization struck, I got excited. The octopus passed the stick back and I began drawing other sea creatures in common sights. We kept on for maybe an hour, and the octopus contributed as much as I. It even drew something that I took to be a crude figure of a submarine with a con tower, propeller screw, and even torpedo holes. And finally, the octopus led me to the other side of the rock, a blank canvas. Far down in the corner, it drew itself and then me. These figures were very small, maybe an inch or 2 tall. Then, painstakingly, it went to work on a much larger drawing. At first I thought it was a whale, but whales are roughly the size of a submarine, so it didn't seem to justify the scale. Furthermore, the proportions were all wrong. This seemed like something more humped and compact, almost as if it were upright rather than aquiline. And it had weird bits sticking out of it that didn't seem like fins. I couldn't place it. An oil platform, maybe? No, the lines were too natural, and an octopus wouldn't know what the top of a platform looks like. When the drawing was done, we both sat and looked at it for a while. I took the stick back from the octopus and circled the drawing of us, then drew a line to the thing. I'm not sure if the octopus picked up on my confusion, because it just sort of sat there for a while. It didn't try to take the stick back. Then it started swimming away. I followed it at a distance. It seemed to be keeping a pace, leading me on. Then it turned and shot into the deep area of the shelf. I was a good way through my second tank and wasn't supposed to go any deeper, so I had to let it go. It stopped once to watch me, then darted off, dissolving into the dark blue depths. I looked after it for a few minutes to see if it would return, but there was nothing, so I started watching the other fish and making my way slowly back to the boat. Then, suddenly there was a low thrumming sound all around me. It wasn't very loud, but it was big, as if it came from the ocean floor itself. I've heard of underwater eruptions, but I've never been in one, and I wondered if I was about to be, but this didn't sound like anything natural. It sounded like the call of some animal, slowed down into the virtually subsonic range and projected from huge speakers very far away. I've had a chance to look over the seismograph recordings for that day, and nothing shows up at the time for that frequency. I have no idea why. The fish were going crazy, darting back and forth, and all heading inland, and not just the reef fish. Larger ones from deeper in were streaming by me even faster. Suddenly among them the octopus appeared again, it or one quite like it. It swam up to me and eyed me strangely, then darted past with the rest. The thrumming sounded again. Looking at the sea, I became gradually aware of a large dark patch. It was very hard to tell how big or far away it was, but there was plenty of both to go around. It was hard to tell more than just a shadow in the murky water, but it clearly wasn't a whale or anything man-made. I couldn't even tell if it was a single creature. They seemed to be long strands like kelp or jellyfish tentacles streaming off it, but immeasurably larger. It looked like nothing so much as an ancient, misshapen section of coral reef broke off and floating. At least the part I could see, it seemed to fade off into the distance as though that mass, immense as it may be, was only a limb to some far larger entity. I've never seen a naval carrier from underwater, but I imagine that's the kind of shadow it would cast. The thrumming rang out a third time. An unreasoning fear seized me. It didn't appear to be in danger. Though the thing was vaster than anything I'd ever seen, it was too far away to reach me quickly, and it seemed like it wouldn't fit into the shallows anyway. Nevertheless, I was gripped by the feeling that if I didn't get away as fast as I could, I'd be dragged down into the abyss and consumed. I could feel the very water itself drawing me down into that black maw. Heedless of the depth or my equipment, I surged upwards. As I rose, of course, I began cramping, but I clawed my way up anyway. I was still far from the boat. When I broke the surface, I could barely move. I had to keep my mouthpiece in, because I couldn't keep my mouth above water. I certainly couldn't call or signal the boat. Far from receding, my panic was worse than ever. From above the water, I couldn't see the thing, or tell whether it was coming for me. I thrashed my slow, painful way towards the boat. Finally, someone on board noticed me, and they came to pick me up. I had the bends bad and had to stay in a hospital for a few weeks until it was over. The doctors tell me I was lucky not to get a stroke or some other permanent damage. So that's my story. I'm sorry I can't give a more satisfying conclusion. I still don't know myself what happened. My friends think it was some form of rapture, but it doesn't seem to match the symptoms. Narcosis is supposed to reduce anxiety, not stimulate it, and my hallucinations, if that's what they were too vivid and specific. Anyway, since then I've been afraid of the water. I've tried going out once or twice, but all I can do is stay shaking in the boat. I think there really was something out there, and I don't think it's something I ever want to come across again.
The first piece of film ever created was made in the year of 1877. This film was under the title of Test. We found it in a warehouse that belonged to my best friend's long-dead grandfather. As the title says, this was simply a test film and nothing more. Or, that's what the title would lead you on to believe. Back in those days, a recording could only go on for less than a minute, so anyone going into this wouldn't expect much. Surprise, it wasn't much at first. This film was like all early films, black, white, and soundless, also incredibly dull. It was 35 seconds long and consisted of a man wearing a black suit walking on an empty sidewalk and a large crowd of people on the sidewalk opposite of him. It was nothing special, and again, it was only a test, but one thing was very strange about this film. After viewing it 10 times in one sitting, we started to notice the small changes that would occur every time we watched it. Sometimes a man sitting down on a bench would be slightly moved over to the right or left. Sometimes a woman wearing what looked to be a light gray dress would be wearing a dark gray dress. It was just small, almost unnoticeable changes. This was fascinating to the few that watched the film, myself included. This was also completely impossible, but somehow it was happening. The small group and I continued to watch for about 10 minutes, and the changes became bigger, more noticeable, and more terrifying. One time it was a minor car accident and the two drivers came out yelling at each other. Nothing too bad. Another time it was a couple arguing. Then we got 20 minutes in and things changed drastically. Sometimes the crowd of people walking would change into a crowd of people fighting, brutally assaulting each other using blades, blunt weapons, and sometimes guns. Sometimes the crowd would be replaced by a pile of bloody, sometimes dismembered bodies. Things just got worse and worse from there.
a man slamming a baby repeatedly on the pavement, a woman gutting a man while a child shoved her own thumbs into her very own eyes, a man in a wheelchair set on fire and pushed down the street between the two sidewalks. Horrible, awful things happened, and they just got progressively worse and worse. After about 35 minutes, we all started hearing sound coming from the film. This was also impossible. Every film made back then was incapable of having sound. This made things so much worse. It's one thing to just watch people die, but having to hear their cries and screams and such makes it so much harder to bear. We could now hear the sounds of knives cutting through the flesh of the victims, the screams of children as they're tortured, the sounds of explosions coming from off-screen. Eventually, the building behind the sidewalk opposite the lone man had disappeared completely and showed off two towers side by side. The Twin Towers. We all knew what was coming next. The first plane hit, next play, second plane hits, next play. People are jumping off the building and hitting the ground, making horrible sounds. This film was made in 1877. There should be no possible way for this to be happening. It showed off multiple other tragedies. The Columbine shootings, VTech, that Colorado theater shooting, public executions by the Nazis, and so much more. That's when I noticed one thing hadn't changed this whole time. The man in the black suit walking on the sidewalk hadn't changed once at all. His movements, suit, face, hair color, skin color, height, everything remained the exact same. The sidewalk as well never changed. This is when I gave him the moniker the Deathbringer. Eventually, I started to feel physically and mentally sick. I felt like I was gonna vomit. I felt tired, ridiculously hungry, insane, dizzy, cold. I felt like I was dying. I passed out on around 60 minutes of viewing. I woke up hours later. Apparently the others had passed out as well. We were all bleeding from our nose and mouth. We looked up and saw one last play on the projector. It was the Deathbringer walking on the sidewalk outside of the building we were watching the film in. When he reached the end of the street this time, he started turning his head to the building, and then the projector died. Since then, we've had the film taken from us by what I assumed to be FBI or CIA. Or something like that. We were told not to say anything, but as you can see, that didn't stop me from talking. Not like anyone's gonna believe me anyways. That's why those guys aren't even keeping an eye on me. Well, at least I hope not. Anyways, we were then taken to a hospital to be checked out. Surprisingly, we had nothing wrong with us physically, but mentally was the complete opposite of okay. Since then, my memories of that night have become very blurry. Initially, I started writing this as an attempt to remember more from the incident, but as I continued to write, I found out that I really don't want to remember. I don't want to remember a goddamn thing. I have nightmares every night of horrible, awful things now, something like that film would have shown. It's been that way for the past year, and I've had it. As for my friends that were in that group, I haven't heard anything from them, and they've since been reported missing. Apparently this happened over a time span of 1 year, but I didn't even know until I attempted to reach one of them through their family. I didn't keep in contact with them. I didn't really want to. If I had talked to them, that would only result in my memories of that awful night becoming even clearer. To be honest, I was relieved to hear that they were missing. Since they are gone, my memories of that night will be forever obscured. I guess I knew that I really didn't want to remember that night subconsciously. I see no reason to keep going on like this. Ever since that day, I stopped going outside less and less, and I'm now starving. But I can't build up the courage to go out. Why? Because sometimes at night, when I look outside, I swear that I see a man in a black suit walking on the sidewalk opposite of my house. Emily's a brave girl. She could fend for herself and didn't need to be the damsel in distress. She's funny, smart, bubbly, and cheerful. Her smile lit up a room. She was beautiful, as if that even mattered. No matter what she looked like, I would love her anyway. I love Emily, in case you didn't notice. I mean, what was not to love about her? Pretty, smart, cheerful, it was all I could ever want. She had these quirks too. I mean, she said she hated them, but I thought they were cute. Sometimes she'd make this little squeak type of noise when she was surprised. Other times, if she was caught off guard, her eyes would widen and she'd be 10 times as more beautiful as before. It was adorable. She looked so innocent like that. She had 2 solid best friends, but she wasn't afraid to make new ones. She was confident but modest. She was always nice to anyone she met. Anyway, Emily was pretty brave during the day, but at night, that's when I realized how vulnerable she actually is. Emily loved reading just like me, and when it got really late, she'd sometimes sneak into the living room and read a book with only the light from her cell phone. Don't ask me why she did it. It was strange, but the only part I cared about was when she went into the hallway. She'd go into the hallway and it would be pitch black. Sure, the phone would help a little, but not really. At that weird time of night, I bet so many monsters must run through Emily's head, grabbing her and dragging her away from her family forever. So she runs all the way down the hall and into her bed. She giggles a little bit when she gets under the bed, probably scolding herself for being so scared. She turns on her iPod and sleeps through the night calmly, probably forgetting ever being scared in the first place. While Emily sleeps peacefully, I stay awake. Emily thinks monsters would attack her in plain sight, but she's wrong. Emily thinks it's her imagination, but she's wrong again. When she falls asleep, I carefully climb over her and lay down beside her. She doesn't stir when I turn on my side to stare at her. I wonder at these times what it would be like to grow old with Emily. I stare at her for what seems like forever, then I lean in closer, so close I can see her whole face in perfect clarity. My God, she really is beautiful. Then I kiss her. She doesn't wake up, she doesn't jump away, all she does is lay limp. I close my eyes, feeling her lips warm mine. For a fleeting moment, I almost feel, well, alive. But it's only for a moment, and when I open my eyes and back away, my heart sinks. I'll never know what it's like to sit with Emily in the summer, holding her soft hand. Her scent lingers on my fingertips, but only for a brief second. It never lasts long enough, and it never will. I get out of her bed, readjust her covers, and look down at her. She really is beautiful. I will always love Emily, even when she jumps away from my shadow, even when she pretends not to see me day in and day out, even when she lies about dreaming of me, even when she opens her eyes to see me, and even when she screams. I never liked Emily. Not that she ever actually did anything to me, she just had that sly, knowing look in her eyes all the goddamn time. That "I know something nasty about you" grin. Like she'd listen to all your secrets but tell everyone if she could. She had a way of turning up when you weren't expecting her to. Uninvited, but there she'd be, grinning, knowing that she'd surprised you, and that even though you hadn't really wanted her around, your mom would just sigh and say, "Well, she's like family, I can't think why you don't like her, and she's never done anything to you, has she? Of course I'm not gonna send her away, don't be silly." So, I decided to make Emily go away for good. I went with her to the park, and while crossing the bridge over the little lake there, I pushed Emily through the fancy railing and into the cold lake. It was harder than I thought, but I got her through and watched as she sunk under the surface. Relieved, I skipped back home, Emily free forever. My mother didn't even ask why she wasn't with me. Probably because when I got up to my room, there was Emily, sitting on my bed, grinning that sly, I know a secret grin. Still damp from the lake. God help me, I'm gonna scream. Who knew dolls could swim?
Have you ever been to Edinburgh? Beautiful city, no matter what time of year you go. The castle that sits at the center of the city is awe-inspiring, looking down on the surrounding area from the mount. The peaks and valleys of the land have resulted in a city that flows with the landscape. Streets that surround can be steep, with the numerous sprawling alleyways even steeper. It is here that we find Flesh Market Close. It could be mistaken for any other darkened causeway in the city. It sits among the shops and tourist traps, relatively non-threatening, and can be used as a shortcut to get down to the station if you're in a hurry. The name has been justified through some who point out that flesh markets were a local term for butchers, and through others who suggested a hangout of women of the first vocation. These are incorrect. There is a market on the close, but flesh is not the product. It's the currency. Market hours are dusk till dawn, and the entrance fee is one mouthful of your own blood. Prepare a glass and progress down the alley. As you get halfway down, swig from the glass and spit it against the wall. The blood will bubble and spread across the wall, coagulating into a hardened scab. This will then start to flake and scatter. A rather anticlimactic door will be revealed beneath. Stepping through is disorientating, as logic will tell you you're stepping into a building. The space you're stepping into has no walls, with darkness shrouding the edges. It is at the penumbra that a number of stalls are set up, run by individuals who look like market traders from across the globe, from Arabian merchants to Cockney grocers to New York street con men. All their clothes are splattered with blood and offal. These figures will entice you to come speak with them and will gesture to numerous signs around their stalls regarding their sales that they're currently having. Upon approaching one of the stalls, they will start to pressure you to make a deal with them. You are certainly welcome to do so, and the products that are available are certainly worth consideration. Starting at the cheap end of the spectrum, you may wish to offer one breath. A lungful will net you knowledge of the weather for the next day. In itself, a rather pointless purchase in this day and age of smartphones and the Met Office, but centuries ago, invaluable. Taking this offer will result in a seller reaching out with his hand flattened, then quickly grasping it into a fist. The air will literally be stolen from your lungs, and cause a few moments of gasping as you catch your breath. Are you attached to your fingers? How attached? I mean, do you reckon you could do without your little finger? This sale will provide you the instant forgiveness from any one person you desire for any wrongs you may have encroached against them. Agreeing to this one will cause the trader to grin and shout, "One Yubitsume special, coming right up." They will lunge forward and grab your wrist, pinning it to the table. Don't resist, because no one likes a tough sell. A flash of steel, and you will be minus one digit. Just remember, you can only pay twice. Now make no mistake, it will hurt. There will probably be a lot of blood, and if you don't take care of the wound, it may even get infected. As the price goes up, you may want to reconsider taking precautions regarding what you trade. Tourniquets and sutures will certainly not go amiss. Now, some of the trades will seem familiar and may hark back to stories and legends that have existed for millennia. This is the influence the market has had on our culture, leaching in over the centuries. A pound of flesh will make it impossible for the next person you make a trade with to renege on the deal. Especially useful if you don't trust the company you keep. It has no use within the market, as all the traders here are trustworthy and will honor a purchase to the letter and the spirit. Best to leave this transaction until last. How about one of your eyes? Depth perception is overrated anyways. Offering up one of them will allow you to converse with our avian friends. You will be able to call down the birds from the trees, and they will be able to answer any question you may have. It is advisable that you avoid ravens. They have their own agenda, and it is not in your best interests. The salesman will grab you around the throat and slowly prise his fingers into the socket. A snap of the wrist, and your visual organ will rest in their palm. Another snap, and it will disappear. It is at this point where you may want to consider stronger measures to ensure your survival of payment. In this strange little world of ours, the market is hardly the strangest. Artifacts and incantations exist that can allow the body to continue to function long past the point at which mortal coils would be shuffled from. One or two can be picked up here, but few are willing to live without their sexual organs. It seems eternity is that little bit colder without the ability to get your rocks off. I'm not going to go into details as to how they are taken. Suffice to say that it is unpleasant and messy. At this point, the prices become a little more vital. What would you take for your stomach? In this deal, it would merit you the ability to understand the desires of anyone you talk to. Whilst you converse with them, your mind will be filled with the images of that which they covet the most. This would provide a significant advantage to any budding salesman, and the deal has been taken up by several of the stallholders themselves. Some may argue that such a gift would be more poetically suited to the heart. That vascular muscle, however, is part of an altogether different deal. By bartering with your heart, you can guarantee the happiness of any given individual for the rest of their life, however long that may be. The removal of these types of organs can be significantly painful, but the dealers will allow you a moment to prepare yourself before they would produce a short, keen blade. One practiced swipe later, and they will be digging into your tissues. They have unnerving accuracy and a level of cleanliness that rivals any surgeon. Now, it is acknowledged that in some places that once the deal has been sealed, a buyer may have second thoughts and may want to back out. This is not one of those places. Most of the contract is left unspoken, but you are expected to have done your research. The buyout clauses are a killer. Whilst most of the body can be put on the table, there are limitations. The fact of the matter is that the brain is the seat of sentience and cannot be fully placed in. I say fully. There was one individual who offered to lobotomize the part of the brain that holds memory as part of the deal. The problem is he cannot remember what it is he received in return. I hear he suffered night terrors for the rest of his days. Now, at this point, I offer you a warning. Up until now, I have detailed the price list for your own body parts. Whatever you do, do not attempt to purchase anything in the market with organs of another. Every figure in the market will stop and stare at you, and the one you attempted to defraud will scream, "That is not yours to trade!" Whatever it is you have tried to barter with, that body part will be taken from you as punishment. A very literal eye for an eye. Despite whatever theological perspectives you may hold, offering your own soul will elicit the same result. There have been many theories postulated for this response, but the honest answer is that we just don't know. The market has been trading in blood and bone for as long as civilization has existed, though the entrance has moved from city to city. Many have visited and shook hands with the butchers, though not quite as many got those hands back. A smart man would wonder how it is that these individuals are capable of honoring the deals they broker. A smarter man would ask himself why his body parts are of such high value in this economy. Just understand that it is supply and demand. And as long as there are fools willing to supply, you shouldn't need to concern yourself with who is doing the demanding.
I love you so dearly, so warming and bright. You give such joy that lasts me through the night. Your smiling face, always so true. Don't you see, I love you. Of all the girls I've come to love, you beyond them soar infinitely above. Your eyes do so shimmer to lighten up my life. I will love you so dearly throughout any strife. Although you no longer see me, I'm sure you'll feel me around, even though, for a while, I've been deep in the ground. That one bad night when we were cold and lost, I held you so tightly to ward off the frost. I can't believe you did this, not in my wildest nightmare, never. Because you had said you'd love me forever. You lied to me, my dear, and that is a true pain. Now pay attention to that sound of the rain. But don't let it get to you. Just rest now, fall asleep. For in the morning your lover shall weep. I'd say I love you, but with your blood there will be art.
Time to be afraid. I'm coming for your heart.
To the one in my dreams, I've been watching you for a while. I know we could be happy together if only you'd hear me out and listen to my wishes. Though I've only been watching you from a distance, I know that I love you, and I could very, very possibly need you. That is, until they got in the way. I mean, this person, what the fuck do you even see in them? I could do so much for you. I could keep you safe and warm. I wouldn't argue with you. I would never hurt you. That is, unless you try to leave. I don't know what crosses my mind more. On one hand, I have the pure intentions of seeing your smiling face, greeting me every morning, but on the other, I know you might try to leave. And oh, the things I would do to you. My plan B is already existent if you deny me of my way. I would have to ruin that pretty little face of yours. I would carve you the jolliest smile, and as you wept, I would kiss away all your tears. Please don't leave me, my dearest. If you would still attempt to escape, I'd have to break your legs. I may not be very strong, but I'm positive a crowbar could do the trick. Stay with me, love. I'll take good care of you. If you would be desperate enough to attempt crawling away from that point, I would simply chain your hands behind your back as to not bring you any more harm. You're already terrified of me enough, aren't you, beloved? Don't worry, I'll take very good care of you. I'll feed you every day and give you plenty to drink. No matter what you say, what venom you spit, what hateful words you have for me, I'll still love you. Eventually, you'll lose the will to fight me. Then you'll understand the depth of my love. You'll respond to my kisses and affection with equal love, that is, I hope. If not, I'll make myself beautiful for you. I'll paint my lips with your crimson. I'll starve myself until I reach perfection in your eyes. I'll even make the effort to set foot outside in the sunlight to add a healthy glow to my skin if that is your wish. I promise to be everything you want. If that is not good enough for you, I fear that I'll have to go to the most drastic measures. I'm being quite literal when I say that I'll take your heart as you've stolen mine. Please, darling, just let me see you smile. I'd rather not resort to my secondary plan. Love me. Forget about them. After all, they've already been taken care of. I'm all you have left, sweet love. I'm anxiously waiting your arrival with open arms. Come cry into my shoulder. Let me hold you. P.S. Would someone please deliver this to Caroline?
In winter of 1944, with overtaxed supply lines in the Ardennes, a German medic had completely run out of plasma, bandages, and antiseptic. During one particularly bad round of mortar fire, his encampment suddenly became a bloodbath. The survivors claimed to hear, above the screams and barked commands of their lieutenant, someone cackling with almost girlish glee. The medic made his rounds during the fire, in almost complete darkness as he'd done so many times before, but never this short on supplies. The bombardment moved to other ends of the line. Most men dropped off to sleep in the still dark hours of the morning, New Year's Day 1945. The men awoke at first light with screams. They discovered that their bandages were not typical bandages at all, but hunks and strips of human flesh. Several men had been given fresh blood transfusions with no blood supplies available. Each treated man was almost completely covered head to toe with a maroon stain of blood. The medic was found sitting on an ammunition tin, staring off into space. When one man approached him, tapped him on the shoulder, his tunic fell off to reveal all skin, muscle, and sinew had been stripped from his torso and his body almost completely dried of blood. In one hand was a scalpel, and in the other, a blood transfusion vial. None of the men treated for wounds that night in that camp saw the end of January 1945.
There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and, exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. Inspiration can be tricky. It can't be defined, yet it's the source of almost every story written. There are ways to inspire yourself, placing your mind in the right position to be more receptive to new ideas. What most people don't realize is that there are one or two other more artificial ways to inspire yourself. There's a ritual that can be performed. Most who know of it will stress the importance of the time of the year and of incantations that need to be read aloud, but these are unimportant. It requires blood, as often the oldest ways do. You must obtain the blood of someone, and specifically it must be blood from a wound that killed them. You must drink this blood whilst writing. For every sample of that blood you collect in this fashion, you will receive inspiration to write one story. These stories will literally be about anything. These stories will literally be about anything. Things that could happen, or even have happened. Things that wouldn't or shouldn't happen. There is one catch. After the first couple stories, you will find a new inspiration that cannot be dampened, and you will begin to write. And before you know what you're doing, you will be typing an admission of guilt, telling everyone what you have done, the crimes you have committed, the blood, the old man near death, the mother-to-be, that poor child. Oh, dear God, no. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class and doing math. It was 6 more minutes until school let out. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned and looked to the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran to the spot where he saw it. He ran so fast that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had a picture of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful he wanted to meet her, so he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or had ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately she also said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placed the picture on his bedside table, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was like a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of his bed, walked towards the window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day again, he asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said, "Sorry, no." When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when he was suddenly hit by a car. He died instantly, picture in hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. He saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. In the fall of 2011, a man hung himself in a bottling factory of a popular over-the-counter sleep aid company just outside Chicago. The man worked as a quality control manager and had just been laid off to save the company money. In the morning, the cleaning crew found him swaying in the breeze from the air conditioning system with a note in his breast pocket that read, "Sleep tight." Over the next few months, a string of strange deaths were associated with areas where the sleep aids from the factory were shipped. Seemingly healthy people had died in their sleep from apparent strangulation. All the victims had severe bruising on their throats. Oddly, police were unable to ascertain how the murderer had entered the victim's home or a possible motive for the murder. Further, vivid reports began coming in from people who had taken the pills but not died. One lady reported taking the pill, and right before she fell asleep, she opened her eyes and a bald, middle-aged man wearing a short-sleeved, white-collared shirt was hovering just above her face. She closed her eyes, hoping the man would disappear, but when she opened her eyes, he was there, inches from her face. She even recalls feeling the man's breathing on her forehead. He then began strangling her. Luckily for her, her husband noticed her gasping for air in her sleep and quickly woke her. Another man recalls falling asleep after taking the pills. He awoke to the figure of a man swaying in the corner of his room. He turned on the light next to his bed and saw the man with better accuracy. He was a bald, middle-aged man wearing a short-sleeved, white-collared shirt. The bald man then removed the noose from his neck and reportedly floated towards the man, attempting to strangle him. Again, it was the man's spouse who woke him. He awoke gasping for air in sheer terror. The FDA did a full investigation and found no evidence of tampering. Even after a recall of the pills and a public awareness campaign warning of possible tampering, the deaths and reports of the bald man didn't stop. It was only when the company shut down the factory that the deaths and reports decreased. It is unknown how many deaths were the result of the apparent tampering, or how many of the pills from that factory are still sitting in cabinets across the country. That thing has been there for almost a week. The figure in the window, it looks featureless, only skin and a human frame, and it's pressing itself against the glass somehow. I don't know how it got there, and I don't know how to get rid of it. At first I thought it was a prank, a doll or a mannequin that some jerks had put there to scare me, but I realized as I walked out of my house to pull it away, it wasn't there. I shrugged it off initially, thinking that someone had hidden it while I was walking through my door, but I went back in and looked out that same window, and it was looking in, staring at me. I walked around my house yelling for whoever it was to come out, but no one was there. The thing is hairless and naked, and it didn't look like it actually had eyes or even a face at all. But its head is turned towards me when I enter the room. When I sit on my computer, I can feel its faceless hatred boring into my neck, but when I turn around, it's innocently turned in a different direction. Finally, on Thursday, I tried to open the window, but it's stuck. I think the thing's hands are keeping it down, but I got a good look at its face. Its eyes and mouth are behind the skin, pushing outward. It stared at me, smiling. Of course, I screamed. I pulled back a fist and smashed it onto the glass, determined once and for all to get rid of the glaring monster. I know I'm strong enough. That glass should have cracked, but it didn't. It shuddered under my hand, but it didn't break, and that smile just got wider and wider and wider until I thought its head would break in half. It raised its own hand and bashed the window with its palm. It was mocking me, but I saw the faintest crack had been to appear where it had hit, and I backed away. No way that I want that smile in the same room as me. So I got a roll of duct tape and started covering the window. I couldn't look directly at it. I nearly shit my pants just knowing it was watching me, but I couldn't help it. I took a quick glance at the skin-covered face, a small peek. It was angry. That grin was now a gaping frown full of teeth. The skin had ripped away from its mouth, and I could see down its cavernous throat. A menacing rumble started to fill the house, and that hairline crack began to spread like splintering ice. I pulled down the duct tape. The rumble stopped. The split skin healed over, and it began to smile again. Now it's night, and the noise hasn't started again. There are no sounds, no rumble, no crackling glass. Everything is quiet now. I can feel its claws gripping the back of my chair. I can hear its skin stretching as it smiles. It's watching me as I record this. And I'm always with you. I was there from the time you were born. I stood in the delivery room, staring down at you before you could even open your eyes to see me. Your parents, relatives, and doctors couldn't see me there in the corner, watching you with cloudy eyes, but I was there from the time you were born. And I followed you home. I was with you always, your constant companion. You played with your toys alone while I stared from all angles in nearby mirrors, my matted, clotted hair with oily sweat that hung off my dented forehead like glue. I was always your constant companion, drifting behind your mother's car on your ride to preschool.
You alone in the bathroom, but I was on the other side of the door, wind whistling through the bruised hole in my throat. My arms twisted and hanging in their socket as I stood hunched on the other side of the shower curtain. I wait and follow you. I follow and drift behind you. I'm not seen. I'm almost not there in light. You never saw me that morning as I sat across from you at the breakfast table, a shiny red clot hanging from an empty tooth socket as I gaped grotesquely at you. I wonder sometimes if you know I'm there. I think you're aware, but you'll never understand just how close I am. I spend hours of your day doing nothing more than breathing in your ear. Breathing. Gagging, really. I crave to be close to you, to always wrap my crippled arms around your neck. I lie near you every single night, cloudy eyes staring at your ceiling, underneath your bed, at your sleeping face in the dark. Yes, you caught me staring occasionally. Your parents came running down to your room one night when you screamed. You were just beginning to talk, so you were only able to cry out, "Man, man in my room." You thought you'd never forget the sight of me, with my collapsed jaw hanging to my chest, swinging back and forth. I sank back inside your closet, and your mother wasn't able to see me, though you pointed and pointed and pointed. You thought you'd never forget when they left that same night. You saw the closet door crack so softly, and me crawling across the floor to your bed on all fours, shambling and jerking movements as I pushed myself under your bed on disjointed limbs. You learned a new word for me. Boogeyman. Not quite the monster you thought I was. I'm just waiting and following you always, touching your face with my knotted fingers as you sleep. You'll see me again soon. Any day now, I'm coming, blunt and brutal. One day, you'll walk across the road, and I believe I'll plow into you with loud roar and a screech. You rolling on the pavement, rolling under wheels, blunt force metal fenders, and my fingers touching your face again and again. As you stare up from the cold pavement with cloudy eyes, your matted, clotted hair hanging in your face and your jaw unhinged and swinging to your chest, you'll see me approaching. No one else will see me. You'll stare past them into my eyes, and I'll leer down at you. For the first time in our life, something like a smile will come over my face. You'll swear you're looking into a mirror as clotted red bubbles from our mouth. I'll lean down past the doctors and the ogling people and pick you up in my crooked arms. Our faces will touch, my wings will unfurl, and then you'll have to follow me. And I am always with you. I am your guardian angel. In Edmonton, Alberta, there is a hotel called the Cantera off of Jasper Avenue and 109th Street. During the night, go here and ring the doorbell. Should you be let in, look to see who the guard on shift is. If the man looks in his mid-20s, yet the hair on his head and face both are white as snow, take a seat beside the security desk. If it is any other guard on shift, leave and return in a week's time. Here you must wait. The guard will not say a word, nor answer any questions you may ask. He hears you, but will not respond. He will only give you a sad look, as if knowing something terrible awaits. When the time is 2:52 a.m., the guard will rise to perform a patrol of the building. Follow him only on this patrol. If you follow him at any time before
2:52 a.m., you will be forcefully removed from the hotel and lose your chance. Say not a word as you walk the halls behind the guard. He will check that all the rooms are locked as well as patrol the stairwells. When you both reach the 5th floor, you will notice that it is remarkably colder than the last 4. Yes, the floor is deafeningly quiet. It is normal. When the guard secures all the rooms on the floor, you will both stop at a door that seems much older than any other door you've yet seen in the hotel. This is room 512. Only this particular guard has access to this room. Take note of the key of which the guard uses to unlock the door. It will be important later. At this point, the guard will open the room for you and allow you to pass through. It will be quite dark, but do not yet be afraid. The worst is yet to come. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and step through the doorway. Do not open them until you hear the door close behind you, for seeing the transition can be maddening. It will be almost unbearably hot here. You will find yourself in a long hallway with numerous turns. There will be 13 doors lining this hallway. Do not open any of them. Take note of which door has a splash of white paint on it. This will be critical soon. When you reach the end of the hallway, you will find yourself in the living room of the suite. In each corner of the room, you should see a tall figure, each with burnt flesh. They should all be sitting on the floor, hugging their legs with their hands upon their knees and facing their respective corner. Their fingers will be chewed away until their tips are nothing but sharp, bony talons. Do not address these figures. Do not touch them. They are her guardians. In the center of this room, there she should be. She will be sitting in an old, ragged reclining chair. It is impossible to say how she will look, for her appearance changes for everyone. She should, like her guardians, be asleep. Do not awaken her from her slumber. For now, you have time to rest. There will be food and drink set out upon the coffee table in front of her, and you are welcome to it. Do not partake in the pie, however, for it will numb your legs. Should you be so bold, take a look outside the window. It will resemble a hellish version of the avenue which the hotel is on. The buildings will be burned out husks of their former selves. The river valley beyond will be dry and cracked. Fire will appear to be on the horizon, and the ever-burning sun will resemble blood set ablaze. Should you stay for hours on end, you will find no reprieve from the heat. There is no night here. Now, look to the streets. You will find the same figures there as the ones in the room. They, however, are awake, shuffling, screaming, and wailing from their back maws. They have no eyes in their sockets, but by some twisted means they can still see. Take care to not attract their attention, for they will follow you back to our world, and this venture will be for naught. When you are ready, stand before her and speak clearly these words. Save me, mother, please. Say nothing else and wait. You should start to hear her breathe. At this point, one of two things will happen. Remember the key which the guard opened this room with. Should she place that same key on the table in front of you, count yourself lucky. Should she, however, place a different key upon the table, you will need to give her an offering. A knife that was not previously on the table will now be present. The blade will be rusted, bloodied. Take this knife and sever a finger, placing it beside the key. Wait. If she places the same key as the guards on the table, you may take it and leave. If not, remove another finger. This will only occur a maximum of 4 times before the right key will be produced. Once the key is in your possession, she will once again return to her haunted slumber. Now pay attention, for you only have a short amount of time. The guardians will be stirring now. Slowly, they will rise from their sleep and turn in towards the room to face you. If they see you, they will slaughter you. Run. You have 10 seconds before they will fully turn from their corners. Remember that door with a white splash of paint? That is the door you will need to use to remove yourself from this hell. If you hear screaming from behind you, the guardians are fully awake and are coming. You don't have much time. Find the white marked door and get out. You will find yourself inexplicably outside your own home, exactly a week after you entered the hotel. Keep the key on you at all times, wherever you go. One day in the future, distant or near, a ragged old door with the number 777 will appear wherever you happen to be. Use the key and open this door immediately. Leave anyone with you behind. Wherever it leads, it will be far better than what is about to happen to this world. The school bell in the old high school rung like it does every night at 12, but nobody knows who rings it. Nobody knows why either. Some say that the bells are rung to call all the spirits to the school, but that might just be part of an urban legend. I don't know why the bell rings, but I do know who or what it is that's ringing it. But to be honest, I wish I didn't know. I wish I was just like everyone else who's left to wonder every night at 12 who's ringing that damn bell. The school was shut down in 1992 after a series of mysterious deaths took place inside the school. Some people in the town believed that it was haunted by the spirits of the teens who were killed in the school back in '72. Some say that they heard whispers as they walked by, and some say they've seen people staring at them through the windows. Nobody was ever brave enough to spend over an hour in the school. The longest anyone had ever spent was 45 minutes, and that was during the daylight, but myself and my partner Charlie had agreed to spend an entire night in the school for our web show Ghost Seekers. We came all the way from Australia and arrived at the school at 11:30, just before midnight. We gathered all our equipment, flashlights and cameras and everything else we've used for our ghost seeking. We entered the building, kicking the pile of empty bottles and soda cans on the way. I was up for the challenge, but deep down inside, I was secretly afraid, and I know that Charlie was as well. I wish we knew what we were getting into. "Hello!" Charlie yelled, his voice echoing through the school. We had our cameras on record and our flashlight in our right hands as we walked through the halls of the abandoned school. Everything was calm for the first 15 minutes until we heard the sound of a locker closing. The sound echoed throughout the building. Every sound pretty much had an echo to it. We decided to follow the sound down the hall where the old gym was. According to our research, 8 students were killed in the gym, and we thought that it would be a good place to start. When we entered the gym, we could immediately feel that something was in there. We didn't need our EMF to be sure. The air was cold, and the sound from our walkie-talkies were nothing but static. Something was interfering with the signal. We at least had some light from the moon that shined through the large windows, so it wasn't completely dark. As we were walking through the gym, the bell in the bell tower went off. It must have been midnight. I saw the bell tower through the gym windows, and at the time I thought maybe I was imagining things because I saw someone up there. It was a silhouette of what appeared to be a man. I shook it off and continued what I was doing. Despite the obvious fact of a presence, we weren't getting much activity in the gym. No whispers, no footsteps, no nothing. It wasn't until we were heading out that something happened. A basketball suddenly came rolling towards us from the back of the room, an area where the light wasn't shining. It was an old, dusty ball, and I admit that it had me feeling really uneasy about the situation. I was a veteran at ghost hunting, but I had never experienced something like that. It wasn't much, though, compared to what happened next. We were walking through the halls on the second floor when I noticed something weird about one of the rooms. I looked through the rectangular glass and noticed a TV was on. It was strange because there was no power in the school. As I continued looking, I was startled by a sudden darkness that covered my view. It was completely dark, as if someone or something were blocking it off. "Hey, mate," I said to Charlie, "there's someone in here." "No way there is," Charlie said before looking through the glass himself. We were both shocked, and the reason for that was because we never actually saw a spirit before. All we ever saw were dark shadows in the footage we caught, but this wasn't a shadow, this was something more sinister. According to our research, this was the room where the killer shot himself. He was dressed in all black. When I looked back inside the room, the TV was off and whoever was standing in front of the door was gone. It was standing there for over a minute, and I was honestly ready to make a run for it, but Charlie kept me from doing so. I wish he hadn't. We continued walking through the halls. By this time, we were hearing all kinds of noises echoing throughout the school. We heard footsteps, lockers opening and closing, and we heard loud crash noises that sounded as if something was being thrown. It seemed the more we stayed in there, the weirder things would get. Charlie thought that if we split up, we'd be able to get more footage faster. "The more footage we get, the less time we'll spend in here," he claimed. Though I agreed with him, I didn't think it was worth it. Nonetheless, I found myself wandering the halls alone. "See anything weird yet?" Charlie asked through his walkie-talkie. Thankfully, I wasn't hearing or seeing anything strange. I kept walking down the halls. My flashlight suddenly started flickering. The batteries were just put in there. There was no way it could have been dying, but it did, and I found myself alone in the dark. Or maybe I wasn't alone. "My flashlight died," I said into my walkie. No reply. "Charlie, you there?" Static. Nothing but static. I could hear someone trying to say something. "He's behind you," whispers from the walkie-talkie. I turned around, but I didn't hear or see anything. I stood there in the dark, amazed I had yet to piss my pants. A minute or two later, I heard a scream that had echoed through the halls. It was Charlie. I didn't know what to do. I screamed his name, and I called over to him over the walkie-talkie, but got no answer. I froze in fear, and I didn't move until I heard a voice echoing through the halls. It sounded as if they were far away, like on the other side of the school. "Steve, where are you?" "I'm over here," I yell. "I can't see shit." I start walking, and then suddenly I was grabbed and pulled into the corner. I was screaming, tried to fight him off until I realized it was Charlie. "Don't do that," I yelled. "I heard you calling me. Why didn't you answer back?" He had a strange look in his face. I could see in his eyes how terrified he was. "That wasn't me. I never called you." We decided that the fame, ratings, or any of that stuff was no longer worth it. We replaced the batteries in our flashlights and walked back to the front entrance. We reached the entrance minutes later, but for some reason the door was locked. We kicked it, punched it, rammed it with our shoulders, but it would not open. We were trapped, and we realized that there was probably no way out. Somebody or something didn't want us to leave, so we decided to stay put. We had our back against the door, and we didn't move. I was greatly regretting ever stepping foot in that damn school, and I'm sure Charlie was as well. I woke up about 30 minutes later. I must have dozed off. I looked around. Charlie wasn't anywhere in sight.
Charlie,
I whispered into my walkie.
where the hell are you?
No answer, just static. I stood up on my feet and noticed someone at the end of the hall. They were just standing there, about 50 feet away. Charlie, is that you? I started to walk slowly toward whoever it was. I heard my pulse beating, echoing through the halls, my breath swiftly moving in and out of my mouth, my footsteps faintly touching the floor. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't Charlie at all. I stood still, but I could still hear my pulse beating, my breath still moving swiftly in and out. He was just staring at me. He was probably staring at me the whole time I was asleep, the whole time I was slowly walking toward him. He was in some black janitor suit, and his face was pale with multiple stitches all over. His eyes were dark. I saw the evil within. His head was tilted sideways as he continued to stare. I didn't understand what it was I was looking at. I've never seen a spirit so real before, but he wasn't just a spirit. He was a demon.
Run!
Something from my walkie yelled, and it most certainly wasn't Charlie. I ran. I didn't know where I was running to. I just ran and didn't look back. I ran to a classroom on the other side of the school, and I locked the door, knowing that if whatever it was a spirit, a locked door wouldn't stop it, but it made sense at the time. I stayed in there for about 10 minutes. It was dark, and I didn't know whether or not someone else was in the room with me. Steve! Steve, it's me! It was coming from my walkie. Where the hell are you, Charlie? I don't know. I woke up in some room. What room? Where are you? I could hear him weeping through the walkie. Steve, I'm scared. He cried. I started tearing up myself. I'd never heard him cry like that before. I'd known him since we were 14, and I'd never heard that. It'll be okay, Charlie. We'll be okay, I cried, hoping I was right. He was weeping uncontrollably. I knew that something was wrong. You don't understand. Look to the right corner of the room. I lifted my flashlight. I didn't understand what the hell was going on. I pointed to the corner and I literally froze in fear. I dropped the walkie to the floor. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't. He was dead. Charlie was dead. I'm sorry. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. I didn't understand how he died. There was no blood, no cuts, no nothing. I guess he saw something. Something that literally took his breath away. I didn't even think about how I was talking to him over my walkie, even though he was clearly dead. The only thing I thought about was that my best friend of 20 years was gone, and I didn't know what to do next. I thought about it, and I realized it must have happened when we split up. His scream. I kept thinking about his scream. I lay there with his body, and I woke up hours later to the sun shining upon my face. I'd never been so happy to see the sun. I figured it was over. I pulled out my phone and I was finally able to call the police. They arrived, and I was finally free of that school and whatever haunts it. I drove away, never looking back. That school needs to be burned down, and hopefully it can kill the demon that lives within it. I can't go anywhere anymore without feeling like I'm being watched. I was traumatized, and I still am. I saw what can never be unseen, no matter how many hours of therapy I go through, I'll never be the same person I was before. I wonder if anyone's ever seen Charlie through the windows or ever heard his whispers as they... I wonder if anyone's ever seen Charlie through the windows or even heard his whispers as they walk by. If they had, I hope they weren't scared, because Charlie was a great guy. If you ever see him, tell him Steve said hi and that he misses him dearly. I don't think I will ever forget what happened in that school. I would never forget the sound of that bell, and I would never forget the demonic face of the thing that rings it. I could see him now, standing on top of that bell tower, waiting for midnight and waiting for his next victim.
I've never been straight with anybody, so I'm gonna tell you something that's true. I hate my family. My older sister moved to America with hardly a goodbye. My dad's dead, and I always hoped my mom would follow him. Well, one day she did. She left behind a crap load of money and a 6-bedroom house set outside the city and with a stream running beside it. My dad had left her a £2 million fortune, enough for her to live on with change, especially since she was too much of a skinflint to spend any of it. Now she was dead, the house and the money sat there. I didn't expect to see a penny. Me and Mom had always hated each other. We didn't have little spats, we had a full-on feud, and growing up, my cheeks would always be red from where she'd slap me. Sometimes she did it backhand and cut my face with her engagement ring. Yeah, we hated each other. It never got better when I matured, and she didn't mellow with old age. She just got more and more spiteful. By the time she died, we'd gone 5 years, 6 months, and 3 days without speaking. To some extent, I sympathized with her. She had had a hard life. My dad spent 4 nights a week out of the marital bed and used to call her ugly and wouldn't let her have self-esteem. It was a depressing marriage. And then there was my younger sister. She was 10 years my junior, and from the moment she was born, she was the favorite, always getting the hugs Mom never gave me. I don't want to whine, but I resented it, and I was cruel to her. Call it my mother's side getting true. That changed when my sister had her accident. She fell 20 feet out of a maple tree and thumped her head on the floor. They said when they found her, blood trickled out of her ears and she was already comatose. She's never woken up. I told you I didn't expect a penny from the will, so you can imagine my surprise when our family lawyer told me I was the sole heir. Yeah, he was surprised too. £2 million in a 6-bedroom house were mine, but on one condition. I had to move in and become my sister's sole carer. Caring for a coma victim isn't hard, to be honest. You just have to listen out for irregular beeps on the machines they have her hooked up to. She had nurses who came once a day to check on everything, so I didn't have to do a thing, and I was a millionaire for it. But I hated being in the same house as her. I mean, she's my sister and all, but after so long in a coma, you're already dead. That, coupled up with how she looked, I mean, I couldn't see her as my sister. She was a woman, technically, but she never developed. She was more like a freakishly tall child. Her bones stuck out, her skin was gray, and her face had the absent look of a corpse. At the beginning, it was unnerving sleeping in the room next door to her. I'd lie in bed trying to sleep, but all I could think about was her on the other side of the wall, immobile and mute. One night, she scared the hell out of me. I was stretched on my bed, lights off, the house as silent as ever. I heard a bang from my sister's room and something clattered to the floor. I thought she'd fallen out of bed, like maybe the nurse had left her in a funny position. I'd ran in her room, but she was laid down like always, face staring absently at the ceiling. On the other side of the room, a photo frame was on the floor. A few nights later, the nurse called in sick, so I checked on my sister myself. I made sure she was nowhere near the edge of the bed. I'd gotten paranoid and switched off all the lights. It was too early to go to bed, so I had a few drinks. The thing about my bladder is it only acts up when I'm in bed, and sure enough, as soon as I tried to go to sleep that night, I had an urge to go to the toilet. On the way there, I noticed my sister's door slightly ajar. I probably hadn't closed it right, but after the photo frame incident, I thought I better check. Everything seemed fine, but when I looked at my sister, I was sure she was wearing a different gown. I wouldn't bet my dead mom's house on it, and you write that kind of thing off, don't you? It must have been a trick of the brain. That explanation satisfied me, and I slept for a few hours. But the next day had me doubting myself again. The nurse was well enough to visit the next night, and she did the usual checks. Before she left, she grabbed me for a word. "I'm sorry about last night," she said. "It was short notice, but you did a great job." "Oh, it was nothing," I said. "No, you were great. I didn't think you'd change your clothes and everything." That got my attention. I didn't press it, because the nurse would never believe me, but you can bet I didn't sleep easy from then on. Every reasonable explanation ran through my head. Did I change them and forget? Was the nurse mistaken? I didn't have a clue. All I know is that I never went into my sister's room if I could avoid it. A few weeks later, I didn't have a choice. The machines she's hooked up to have alarms, and one night they started making a racket. I got my ass into her room as quickly as I could, and as soon as I did, the alarm stopped. It was a big relief. Then, I looked at my sister's face. Her mouth was wide open, an enormous cavity aimed at the ceiling, the corner of her lips crooked. They said it was just a reflex, but as much as I wanted to buy it, I still moved my bedroom to the other side of the house as far away as I could get. I'd hear noises every night, scaring the crap out of me every time. I lost sleep, and I was a stressed out wreck. As pathetic as it sounds, I didn't dare go check on her. And then, something happened that made me move out of the house. It was a rare night where I felt like I was gonna get some sleep. I was in that in-between stage where, you're on the edge of sleep but not quite there yet. Then, my bedroom door opened and banged shut. It took me straight out of drowsiness, and I sat up in bed. I could feel something in the room with me. It wasn't right. On the floor beside me, lit in the moonlight, was my sister. Her body rigid and her mouth wide open, her face looking at mine. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientist for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientist rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with a scientist for the first time in his study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." And his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death.